Joining me today is Karl Janson, Superintendent at Cabool Schools in Cabool, Missouri, over there in Texas and Douglas County in South Central Missouri. I first met Karl about 10 years ago when he was the superintendent over at Everton. People call me all the time and ask me about the 4-day week. And I learned about the 4-day week from people like Karl, because when I retired from the public schools, I had never been involved in a 4-day school week district. When it came to Missouri State, they said adopt a research agenda, and I selected the 4-day school week, and then I hit the road and visited with people like Karl and learned all about it. Karl, introduce yourself within the framework of the 4-day school week. How did you first start with the 4-day school week? And I'm thinking it was at Everton when you first started the 4-day week.
Sure. I actually started when I was a K-12 principal up in a district called Higbee outside of Moberly, Missouri. And in 2009, Lathrop was the first district in the state to go to 4-day. And I just went, that's an interesting idea. And just watched Lathrop over the years to see how they did. Student achievement is the biggest concern people have. And when you're talking about a big change like this, that's what you don't want to see any impact on student achievement, especially negative. Improve student achievement, fantastic. Negative, we don't want that. So I just kind of watched Lathrop, and then I became superintendent down in Everton in 2012, and they were having some financial issues, and we had to do something quick to leave the school on a safe financial footing, and then start building reserves back up again. The 4-day week was an interesting way to do that because we could save some money, hopefully attract good talent at the same time. So that was our approach, and we surveyed our community, and I didn't think there would be a lot of support for it, but I thought this is a way we can save money without having to fire people or lay people off, things like that. And it came back with 85% support. And so at that point, I was like, well, I guess we're going forward with this thing. And so we did. And it's just been a tremendous journey and learning the pros and cons of implementing a 4-day. And we were very successful with it at Everton. And when I came to Cabool, of course, the teachers were like, oh, is he going to do this 4-day? And that wasn't my intent when I came here. I just want to do what's best for school. And even the people in the community were like, hey, tell us about this 4-day thing. And it just would not go away. And there were no other 4-day school districts around us in Cabool. In fact, at Everton, we were the first district in Southwest Missouri to go 4-day. And so we just started talking with people about it and answering their questions. And then again, we surveyed the community and came back about 75% in support of going to 4-day. And so we just started moving from there. And we've been 4-day here since 2020. And it has done exactly what I said it would do as far as reducing turnover, increasing our applicant pool of quality applicants. And it's just been a win-win for us. And unfortunately, now the school district around us are like, we're tired of them stealing our teachers. So now they're going to 4-day, or what they call hybrid 4-day.
Karl, help me. And just hearing you talk again, it harkens me back to the first time I met you back in Everton. And again, at that particular time, that was one of my first road trips. Is that at that time, I think we had about 30 4-day school weeks in the state of Missouri. And Everton, do you happen to know what number you were in Everton when you adopted?
We were like 20, 25 maybe in the state.
So you were in that first 30. And just again, I know some people around the country may listen to this. And within context now is that within that 10 or 12-year period, we've gone from 30 in the state to now we're over 180. So over a third of the school districts in the state of Missouri are on the 4-day week. And as I heard you talk there, and you talked a little bit about money and the issues and the challenges of Everton, not that I want to dwell too much on Everton, but again, it's one thing that I think is important to understand, that the issues that may have been in Everton may be different than Cabool. You mentioned other school districts, of course, around the state, knowing that each one is very different. And so talk a little bit more within the context of Everton. So Everton, roughly 150 students, K-12, probably 30, 35 certified staff members in the district, something like that. So talk to me a little bit about even that recruitment and retention piece. And again, the money piece, as far as how that was a real challenge for Everton to compete with other school districts.
Sure. So yeah, we were just about 150 kids, K through 12, and I had about 25 certified staff and about 8 non-certified staff, and very low assessed evaluation. In Missouri, of course, we're local property taxes and all. Overall budget, I think that the district was about $4 million, and we didn't have much in our reserves. We had less than 7% in our reserves, I believe, when I started there. And it was going to continue to go south unless we did something radical. And we looked at all the contracts we had with vendors and things like that as ways to save money. The 4-day week was another way to save some money. Unfortunately, at the time, my classified had to take a 20% pay cut when we went to 4-day. That is not ideal, but again, I didn't have to lay anybody off or fire anybody. Fortunately, again, at Everton, kind of a singular situation, none of my classified workers were the primary breadwinners of the household. So they were able to absorb that a little better than the single mom or something like that. But as the years progressed and financial situation got better, we were able to make some of that back up for them. But we are always losing teachers to the neighboring districts. We're a very small district surrounded by a lot of larger districts. People would come to Everton as their stepping stone, do a couple of years, and then bounce. And so how could we keep them there longer? If I could get a teacher for 5 years, that'd be a big improvement over the 2 years that was the average. And so having that 4-day week was a carrot that I could offer that none of the other districts around me were offering. And even though we're going the same number of hours as the other districts were doing in 4 days versus 5, and that 3-day weekend piece was just
I remember at that particular time, Carl, a neighboring district over there in Everton, Shannon Snow over at Stockton, who's retired now. And one time, just jokingly, she called me and she said, I wish you'd stop talking about the 4-day week, because she says the more people that adopt this, I get a great bump in applications there at the beginning. But again, when you get to the point where 20 and 30% of school districts in the state are on the 4-day week, everybody's within a driving distance of a 4-day week almost, as far as a teacher is concerned. And they can definitely hop and choose where they want to go. And especially, like you said, if you can't compete on salaries, what other arrows do you have in your quiver? And we know that 4-day school week is very attractive to all workers, not just certified staff, but even bus drivers and things like that. So now, Carl, I don't want to put you in this difficult position, but jump ahead down to Cabool. Okay. Again, you had a little experience under your belt as far as implementing it in Everton. Cabool's larger. Again, there's not a lot of districts around Cabool that had the 4-day week. That south central-ish part of the state was one of the later adopters of the 4-day week. And then you adopt in Cabool, and now again around you, school districts around you adopt the 4-day week. Can you talk me through your Cabool time adoption, and again, I guess I would say how neighboring school districts responded?
Sure. You know, what I learned at Everton when I came to Cabool, and one of the problems Cabool has is they're the smallest district in our little part of the world and surrounded by larger, better paying districts. And so we still had they had the same issue of people coming in for a year or two and using it as a stepping stone to go somewhere else to get a larger paycheck. We don't have a lot of large industry in Cabool anymore. You were here a long time ago. Economically, Cabool's always been in this tussle because of its geographic location and things. What's something we could do that would help with our recruitment and retention of new people? Now, we're great at having in-home people who grew up here and stuff come and they stay and they don't want to leave, which is fantastic, but we're not at 100% of that yet. And so what is something we could do without raising our tax levy and things like that? This was, again, the 4-day. I knew with the 4-day, we could really bump up our recruitment of highly qualified staff. And again, people were very interested in talking to the board. We surveyed the community. We went forward with it. The first year we implemented, we got 5 highly qualified, I'm talking highly qualified teachers from somebody next door that are still here today and are still rocking it for us. And every year people went through that dry spell after COVID of not being able to find people. We had a few, but we didn't have as many as most of the districts around us because we've been able to create a climate and a culture around our 4-day. And it's just working so well for us here in Cabool.
And I'll just mention, I was in your high school the other day, recently here from the last week, in fact, and I happened to see your high school principal, Mr. Shockley, and I started my usual conversation about what can Missouri State do for you? And usually most people jump immediately to, we've got vacancies that we can't fill. And Mr. Shockley, he said, we really don't have that much turnover. I know that you're living it, but that's not the response, Carl, I get from other schools in rural Missouri. We're having that turnover, and so that is a credit to, like you said, the culture that you've built there, that if Cabool High School is just not having that much turnover and you're not stressed about getting applicants and keeping people, that Of course, that's not all the 4-day week, but again, it's part of it.
It's a nice piece of it. Absolutely.
Now, Karl, again, let's talk about your Cabool experience. You had your experience at Everton going through and getting it developed, and you come to Cabool and everybody's asking you about it because they've known you from your experience, probably during the application process to come to Cabool, that you were coming from a 4-day school week district. And I'm sure that was part of the discussion amongst people. And so they're coming and approaching you about this, and you go through the process to adopt it. So give us what advice you would have to a school district that's considering the 4-day school week, working with community, working with school board members, working with staff, as far as what's the process that you would recommend after doing this in 2 different school districts. What's your main key takeaways on this is how, learning from your experience, you should, again, approach the topic?
Yeah. You gotta have your reason. Why are you doing this? Why is this important for the district to consider? Because again, 4 days is not going to work in every community and things like that. So why do we need to even be thinking about it in our community? What's the benefit for us? What's the benefit for our students overall?
Again, just your key takeaways on how you approach this with community members. I'll just give you an example. It's from some of our early research on the topic, so that obviously staff are supportive of it, both certified and non-certified. Even if non-certified are taking a financial hit, we found through our research that they still support the 4-day school week and would like to go to it. But we also know that, like, the community is not necessarily always that case. Typically through our research is that people in the community that have kids of school age are much more likely to support the transition to the 4-day week than, let's say, maybe retired people or people that no longer have kids in school are more likely to be negative. The same way about the dynamics on a school board. Younger school board members tend to support the idea. Older school board members tend to support it. Any thoughts on how you navigate that, just the process of beginning those first steps about to consider it? And when there were a lot of early adopters in Missouri, I'd go in and be a speaker at these groups, and only about half the schools that ever considered doing it actually followed through and did it. It wasn't everybody that considered it did it. There was a thoughtful process. So talk me through, what's that process to go through?
Yeah. Again, like I said, having your why. Why are you going to do this and how are you going to implement it? Different school districts have different concerns. Another school district further to the east of us, they have a lot of Department of Transportation workers, Missouri Department of Transportation workers. And so they have Fridays off because most of their workers are off on Fridays. And so they went with a Friday off. For us, we're a football school, football Friday night. It's crazy. One thing that we've learned from the research and looking what other schools have done is if you have a bunch of activities on Friday night and you're off on Friday, you don't get that 3-day effect from that. Where if you just have activities on Monday night and you're off on Monday, you still have that 3-day weekend effect. So people really like that. With our older folks, we're not teaching these kids to be prepared for work. And I'd always just ask them, I say, how many jobs nowadays are Monday through Friday, 9 to 5? And they go, not many. It's not the hospital in Texas County. They do 3 days a week, 3/12s. And one of the things that I found with the 4-day in Everton was when the parents would go and talk to their work about, hey, can I restructure my hours of work to where I can be off on Monday with my kids and take them to the doctor then and not having to take a day off of work somewhere else and things like that? And a lot of our families' employers were like, yeah, we can make that work. And so that cuts down on their absenteeism because the parent isn't having to leave work to take their kid to the dentist or whatever. Daycare is always the biggest concern. Who's going to take care of not my kids, but somebody else's kids? And you just got to have a plan to deal with that if it's actually needed. In Everton, we were going to hire a teacher on staff on Mondays, rotate that, and then hire a couple high school students to help provide some daycare services if that was needed. In Cabool, we had an agreement with the YMCA. We were going to let them use our facilities, and they were going to have a Monday day camp or whatever. And nobody took them up on it. Now, the Stars Foundation in town, they do have a Monday thing for they do a lot of theater things. And so all their theater kids go to that on Mondays, but that works out great for them too, because they can practice their performances and things like that. It's just, again, having those conversations and just being real with people. This is why we're doing it. This is how we're going to approach it. And this is why we think it's going to be good for the district and your kid overall.
And I worked with school districts, especially when we're having so many adopt early in Missouri. I would get a number of calls coming into the first year, and usually a number of calls right after they had started the first year. But then it would get quiet. And so I'd reach back out to people at the end of the first year and I'd say, how'd it go? And almost everybody said, it was better than we expected. You think it's so much different on the 4-day week, and it really wasn't that much. But the question I want to focus on is that something changes around year 3 and 4. That things that when we first adopted the 4-day week, everybody, for example, was highly engaged in professional development. They came happily and they were enthusiastic. And then by the time they got to year 4 and 5, they began talking about, do we really need to continue to do these PD days? We've been doing this for 4 years now or 5 years now. Again, you've been in 2 different districts that have done it more than a year. Do you have any reflections on how it's different in year 1 than it is in year 5?
Not really, because anytime, of course, I get people that say, why do we have to keep doing these PD Mondays and stuff? I don't do full day PD Mondays because, again, I want people to be able to have that time off to refresh. Our teachers work their tails off, and I think I can get more out of them in 4 hours with quality PD than I can in 8 hours, because eventually they're going to tune out. And we just do 4 hours once a month for professional development. And then when I do get asked the question, why do we have to do so many? I just look at it and say, have we gotten to our destination yet? Are we where we want to be as a school district? And are our kids where we want them to be, depending on what grade they're in? And until we get there, we're always going to need PD.
Great. Now, Karl, I'm going to play a little hypothetical game with you, especially considering you talked about what's your why. Okay. So let's say I'm a superintendent and I'm on a 5-day week, but I'm calling you for advice about considering the 4-day week. Am I going to save money? Is that a good why? Tell me your thoughts on it.
It's not a good long-term why, because you end up saving about 2% your first year out of your budget, which isn't a lot of money. If you had to do it to save money, that's fine. But my non-certified staff in Everton took a 20% pay cut. I don't ever want to have to do that to anybody. Your why is just money, then there may be some other things you need to look at before you try and take this to your community and say, I'm going to cut these people's salaries 20% and give the teachers an extra day off. That doesn't go over real well in a blue collar community. We didn't do that at Cabool. We didn't need to. Financially, we could afford it. We just restructured their hours where they were still working 40 hours and didn't take a pay cut. Just to do it for financial reasons. Every state is different how they fund schools. Like one of the biggest ways you save money in 4-day is transportation costs. Your buses are traveling 20% less, you're fueling them 20% less. But in Missouri, we get paid for how many miles our buses drive. And so the next year, you're going to get less in transportation money. So you're going to see that upfront savings, but not over the long term.
Yeah, great. And I love all that, Karl. And again, one of the things I appreciate you talking about the why is that, like you said, messaging that part about where your lowest paid people in your school district. And by the way, you and I both this, in many of the communities that are on the 4-day week, the school district is the largest employer. So of the largest employer in your community, the lowest paid people, those non-certified staff, by going to the 4-day week are taking a pay cut. And again, that just doesn't sell well. It doesn't market well. And again, knowing that our schools are the hubs of these communities, in these rural communities that we're in, it just doesn't sell well. And so it's one of those things that I just always caution people. And again, like you said, it's different if you're forced into that position, but it's really different if, again, you're trying to convince people. By the way, sometimes these community meetings, I'm invited for community meetings, and I know that school district is never going to go to the 4-day week. But school leaders want to have these hard conversations with the community. And they know if we're talking about the 4-day week, everybody will show up in the gym. If we're just having a conversation about the challenges the schools have, the only people who show up is the teachers. Will be nobody else to come to the gymnasium. But if we talk to the 4-day week, it's really packed. And I have been in small rural communities that have 150 kids, and there'll be 300 people show up to the community meeting to discuss the 4-day week. So it's a great way to engage people. Okay, now if I'm a different superintendent, Karl, and I'm calling you and I'm saying I'm 5-day, but I'm considering going to the 4-day week because of the teacher shortage and because I can't get certified people or bus drivers and things like that. What are your thoughts? Is that possible?
Absolutely, that's possible. As far as on the teacher side of it, yes, if you're the only 4-day in your area, you're gonna attract a lot of the neighboring talent because they're gonna that idea of coming there, even if maybe I'm getting paid a little less. I'm also working 20 Mondays less. And who doesn't want to work 20 Mondays less a year? That is a huge carrot if nobody else around you is offering that.
And just a general question, Carl, and I know you've talked about, obviously, it seems to be still popular in Everton because Everton's still on the 4-day week, even though you're not there anymore. They've continued on with it, and the board at any time could have decided to go back to a 5-day if they wanted to. The same in Cabool. You're on multiple years now on the 4-day week. When you're walking on the main street in Cabool, do you have people come up to you to talk about it, or is this just a non-issue in Cabool now?
It's just a non-issue now. After about the second year, it's pretty much a non-issue. The biggest issue I ever have with people is getting them to understand that while, yes, we're 4-day, we're still going the same number of hours we were before. We're just restructured how we're doing it. And it's just that you say 4-day and people go, oh, less school. No, it's more school, the same amount of school. They call it punting the rhombus. You kick out the busy work and let's just focus on what the kids need to learn. And if it's done right, scores go up. We have the highest APR of any school district in Texas County this year. That's our annual performance report by the state, and we're 4-day. The 4-day is not the reason why we're number one, but it certainly is a piece of it.
Now, Carl, I'm talking to you in April of 2025. You're going to retire here in June. And you have more ability to speak freely than most people do. And I would talk, knowing that this may be shared with other people that they'll hear. In hindsight, Carl, can you think of any mistakes that you made on the 4-day week that other people can learn from? Since you were on the bleeding edge of the 4-day week, are there things that you know now not to do that you did? It's just learning.
No, John, because I'm awesome. No, I spent a lot of time talking to the other districts in Missouri that had already gone 4-day and trying to learn from them about what what they learned, their pros and cons, their mistakes. And so we could have it in place well enough to where we would minimize a lot of that. It seemed to be about once you got through the first quarter, after that, everything started sailing pretty smooth in your first year. The worst thing now is if you have to go to school 5 days because of snow makeup days or something like that, your teachers are just like, I can't do it, boss. I can't do it.
5-day week long. It's all.
That's where we're off for Good Friday this week. So Monday was our makeup day. Attendance is always 4 on a makeup Monday, but the state requires us to do that. And that's what we're going to do. But overall, there's just so many things that have gone so well that overshadow any of the negatives. It's hard to even remember what they were. When you go to a 4-day week, just discipline in and of itself goes down about 50%. I'm talking your serious discipline. It says, I don't know what it is about 5 days, but your frequent flyers, and y'all know who I'm talking about, really get to cruising altitude on a 5-day week.
On the 5th.
That 4-day week interrupts that some way, somehow, to where the principals aren't having to deal with as much discipline. The teachers aren't having to deal with as much discipline in the classroom. Imagine how much that affects instruction when you're not having to constantly deal with these disruptions. Just winter chicken dinner there at Everton. And I don't know if you saw, did you see the Missouri Department of Conservation's post just the other day with the girl holding the big fish? That's my former student from Everton, that she was able to do her internship at Dickerson Park Zoo in Springfield on Mondays. She was the first high school intern they ever had because she could go there on Mondays. She graduates, goes to the University of Miami for marine biology, and now she's back here in Missouri working for the Department of Conservation. That is just a success story in and of itself. It's just awesome.
Yeah, great. I love that, Carl. And that's one of the things that I tell people is that the 5th day is an opportunity. And we talk a lot about PD as an opportunity, and we talk about getting re-energized and helping dealing with stress and things like that. But there's a lot of opportunities for kids and things that early in our careers, to be candid with you, Carl, job shadowing opportunities, working out at workplaces and observing what it's like to work. Those opportunities were available early in my career, but at some point, those opportunities were lost, and we just didn't do that anymore. And there's so many 4-day school week districts that are really doing innovative things on the 5th day, opportunities for kids on the 5th day that are separate from the school, but are still part of their education and their preparation for their future. That, again, it's a great opportunity to move forward that way. And I'd like to thank Dr. Karl Janson, the Superintendent of Schools at the Cabool School District in South Central Missouri, for this conversation about the 4-day school week. Karl was one of the first to start the 4-day school week. He was definitely the first to start it in Southwest Missouri. when he was superintendent at Everton. And then when he moved on to Cabool, he also implemented it there. And he was one of the really the founding fathers of the 4-day week in Missouri. And I appreciate looking back with Karl about the 4-day week in Missouri, which again is in over a third of the school districts in our state.